A little girl stumbled out of an alley behind Parliament, blood trickling down her face. The Royal Guard wasn't supposed to move, wasn't supposed to speak. But when she tugged his trouser leg and whispered something that made his blood run cold, Lance Corporal Thomas Deren did something no ceremonial guard had ever done before. He picked her up, carried her straight into the House of Commons, and interrupted the Prime Minister mid-speech. What she told him in that moment changed everything. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Now, let's get into it. The May afternoon hung thick over Westminster. That familiar London blend of exhaust fumes and centuries-old stone. Parliament Square buzzed with its usual chaos. Tour groups clustering around Churchill's statue, reporters hovering near the gates, hoping for a ministerial soundbite, black cabs honking at tourists who wandered too close to the road. A street performer near the tube entrance was doing magic tricks for a small crowd, children laughing as coins appeared and disappeared. Lance Corporal Thomas Deren had been standing at the South Courtyard checkpoint for 6 hours straight. 34 years old, Welsh Guards, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and a chest full of ribbons that meant something to people who understood what they cost. The military cross from his second tour for extracting wounded civilians under heavy fire in Helmand. The Queen's Gallantry Medal from his first, for actions he still didn't like talking about. His bearskin hat added 8 inches to his already imposing frame, and his scarlet tunic was pressed to razor-sharp perfection. The weight of his SA-80 rifle across his chest had become as familiar as breathing. To the tourists snapping photos, he was just another piece of living history. A statue in red and black who never moved, never spoke, never acknowledged their existence, a living postcard. They posed next to him, made faces, tried to get him to smile or react. Children waved frantically, hoping for even a blink of recognition. Some attempted to touch his rifle or bearskin hat, forcing the nearby police officers to gently redirect them. Others shouted questions at him. "Are you hot in that uniform? How long can you stand still? Is that gun real?" As if he might suddenly break character and start chatting. They had no idea that behind those steady grey eyes, Deren was cataloguing everything, every face, every bag, every movement that didn't belong. The woman in the blue coat who'd walked past 3 times in 20 minutes. The delivery van that had been idling across the street longer than any legitimate drop-off required. The man with the camera who wasn't actually taking pictures. It's what kept him alive in Helmand Province, where a misplaced shadow or an unfamiliar face could mean the difference between coming home and coming home in a box. It's what made him good at this job, even when people thought all he did was stand still and look pretty. That's why he noticed her before anyone else did. She came stumbling out of the narrow alley that ran between the Ministry of Justice Annex and the old Treasury building. 8 years old, maybe 9. Oversized navy hoodie hanging off her thin shoulders, jeans torn at both knees, scuffed trainers that had seen better days, laces untied and trailing. But it wasn't her clothes that caught Deren's attention. It was the blood. A gash ran from her left temple down to her cheekbone, fresh enough that it was still weeping. Her right arm hung awkwardly at her side, like her shoulder was hurt. She moved with that careful, measured walk of someone in pain, trying not to show it. There was dirt under her fingernails and what looked like brick dust in her hair, as if she'd been climbing or crawling through tight spaces. But there was something else. Something that made Deren's trained eye linger on her longer than it should have. The way she held herself, alert, wary, constantly scanning. Not the confused wandering of a lost child, but the calculated movement of someone trying to stay alive. Most of the tourists didn't even see her. She was just another kid, probably separated from her parents, probably crying for attention. When they did notice her, they quickly looked away. The blood made them uncomfortable, and this was supposed to be a fun day out. But Deren had learned to read body language in places where getting it wrong meant people died. This girl wasn't lost. She was running from something. She picked her way through the crowd like she was navigating a minefield, checking over her shoulder every few steps. Her eyes weren't scanning for familiar faces the way a lost child would. She was watching the rooftops. Systematically, left to right, building by building, like she was looking for something specific, or someone. When a tour group got too close, she flinched and pressed herself against a concrete barrier. When a police officer walked past, a community support officer checking on the crowd, she turned her face away and hunched her shoulders, making herself as small as possible. This wasn't normal behavior for a child seeking help. This was a child trying to stay invisible, to survive. And that triggered every alarm bell Deren had developed over 18 years of keeping people alive. The girl reached the ceremonial rope barrier and stopped directly in front of him. For a moment, she just stood there, looking up at him with dark eyes that held too much fear for someone her age. Then she reached out and tugged gently on his trouser leg. Guards don't move. Guards don't speak. Guards don't acknowledge civilians under any circumstances. It was drilled into them from day one. You are a statue, you are tradition, you are unbreakable. But when this little girl whispered 4 words that cut through the afternoon noise like a blade, Thomas Deren broke 18 years of training. They're going to kill him. Not the Prime Minister, not anyone specific, just him. But the way she said it, flat, matter of fact, like she was reporting the weather, made Deren's blood turn to ice. He looked down at her properly for the first time, blood still wet on her face, dirt under her fingernails, and in her eyes, that hollow look he'd seen before in war zones. The look of someone who'd witnessed something terrible and knew exactly how much danger they were in. "Where?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She pointed behind her toward the cluster of government buildings that overlooked Parliament's main entrance. White coat, long black thing, he was lying down with it. Deren felt every muscle in his body tense. Sniper. Had to be. The elevated position, the clear line of sight to where ministers entered and exited the building. He made a choice that would either save lives or end his career. Without a word, he bent down, scooped the girl into his arms, and turned toward the security checkpoint. The crowd gasped. Phones came out. Someone shouted, "Is that allowed?" But Deren ignored them all. His boots echoed against the stone as he carried her toward the heavily guarded entrance to Parliament itself. The first checkpoint was manned by 2 MOD police officers and a metal detector system that looked more like airport security than the historic entrances tourists imagined. Sergeant Collins, a veteran Deren recognised from previous shifts, stepped into his path with his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. Collins was ex-Royal Marines, the kind of man who'd seen enough action to take threats seriously, but enough false alarms to be sceptical of everything. "Corporal Deren, what the hell are you doing? You can't bring civilians past the barrier. You know the protocol. Any civilian access has to be pre-authorised, logged and escorted by designated personnel." Behind them, a small crowd was gathering. Phones were already out, recording everything. Someone was live streaming to Facebook. This would be trending on Twitter within minutes, analysed by every armchair security expert in the country. "She's witnessed a threat," Deren said, not slowing down. "Possible sniper. Needs immediate escort to interior security." Collins blinked hard, processing what he'd just heard. "Sniper? Based on what intelligence? Have you been in contact with Control? What's the nature of the threat assessment?" "Based on her?" Deren nodded toward the girl in his arms. She saw someone setting up a rifle on one of the surrounding buildings. Professional setup, communication equipment, the works. "You're breaking formation on the word of a child." Collins's voice carried the disbelief of a man who'd spent 5 years watching tourists try every trick in the book to get inside Parliament. "Do you have any idea what kind of disciplinary action this could trigger?" We're talking court-martial territory here. The question hung in the air like smoke. Behind them, more tourists were gathering, phones recording everything. A news crew from Sky News had spotted the commotion and was setting up their camera. This would be on the evening news, analysed and dissected by experts who'd never stood guard duty in their lives. But none of that mattered to Deren. What mattered was the steady weight of the girl in his arms and the absolute certainty in his gut that she was telling the truth. Deren looked Collins in the eye. In Helmand, kids were often our best early warning system. They see things adults miss because they're not supposed to be there. Collins studied the blood on the girl's face, then looked at Deren's expression. In 5 years of gate duty, he'd never seen the unflappable Welsh guard look genuinely concerned. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, then spoke into his radio. "Control, we have Corporal Deren incoming with a civilian miner reporting potential threat, requesting immediate protocol override." The radio crackled. "Negative on civilian access. Refer to local authorities." Deren stepped closer to Collins. "Mike, you've seen me stand in the rain for 8 hours without moving. You've seen me take abuse from drunks and protesters without flinching. I'm telling you right now, this is real." Collins hesitated, then made the call that probably saved the Prime Minister's life. "Control, override granted. Escorting to interior security now." He stepped aside. Parliament's interior was a maze of red carpet and centuries-old tradition. Aides hurried past with briefing folders, their footsteps muffled by thick rugs. Portrait eyes followed Deren as he carried the girl deeper into the building, past security checkpoints that waved him through, based purely on the authority in his stride. The girl hadn't said another word. She just clung to his tunic, her small fingers twisted in the heavy fabric, watching everything with those two alert eyes. They could hear the Prime Minister's voice now, echoing from the main chamber. Prime Minister's Questions was in session, the weekly parliamentary theatre where careers were made and destroyed with perfectly crafted sound bites. 2 diplomatic protection officers stood guard outside the chamber doors. They moved to block Deren's path as he approached. "Absolutely not," one of them said. "You cannot interrupt a sitting session. I don't care what—" "She saw a sniper," Deren said simply. "Third building over. Man in a white coat setting up a rifle. She ran here to warn us." The officers exchanged glances. One spoke into his radio. "Control, we have a potential threat report from a civilian miner. Request immediate rooftop visual of surrounding buildings." Static crackled back. "All units, conducting sweep now. Stand by." Through the heavy wooden doors, they could hear the Prime Minister fielding questions about education funding. Normal political theatre. Boring, routine, safe. The girl stirred in Deren's arms and looked up at him. "He had a special shirt," she whispered, "like doctors wear, and he had wires coming out of his ears." Communication equipment, professional setup. This wasn't some random nutter with a grudge. The radio crackled again. "Control to all units, visual confirmed. Subject in white coat on rooftop of Treasury Annex. Appears to be handling equipment. Armed response dispatched." The DPO officers went pale. One of them yanked open the chamber doors. The House of Commons fell silent as a fully uniformed royal guard stepped across the threshold, carrying a bloodied child. 200 of the most powerful people in Britain turned to stare. The Prime Minister stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. "Sir," Deren called out, his voice carrying across the hushed chamber, "this girl has information about an immediate threat to your life." Chaos erupted. MPs jumped to their feet. Security officers poured in through side doors. The Speaker banged his gavel uselessly as voices rose in confusion and alarm. But through it all, the little girl just watched, like she'd seen this kind of chaos before and knew it would pass. The Prime Minister descended from the dispatch box, his face a mixture of anger and bewilderment. What is the meaning of this? We're in the middle of... There's a man on the Treasury roof, Deren interrupted. Sniper rifle. She saw him setting up. She ran here to warn you. The PM looked at the girl properly for the first time. 8 years old, covered in blood, staring back at him with the kind of steady gaze that adults found unsettling in children. What did you see? He asked her directly. Man in white coat, she said, her voice barely audible in the vast chamber. He had a long black thing in pieces, was putting it together on the roof, had wires in his ears like the police do. The PM's security detail was already in motion. Radio chatter filled the air as armed response teams coordinated with rooftop units. On the chamber's main display screen, live feeds from security cameras started cycling through exterior views. And Camera 12, scanning Treasury building, a voice crackled over the intercom. Nothing visible on first sweep. Try thermal imaging, someone called from the security booth. Switching to thermal... Wait. Contact. Single heat signature, northeast corner, behind the ventilation housing. The screen flickered, then zoomed in. At first it was just a grainy image of concrete and metal ductwork. Then the camera adjusted, and there he was. A figure in medical scrubs, crouched behind a ventilation unit on the Treasury building, barely 50 yards from where they sat. In his hands was the unmistakable outline of a sniper rifle, scope-mounted, partially assembled. Even from this distance, they could see the bipod legs extended, the weapon trained toward the very windows they were standing beneath. The chamber fell deadly quiet. Some MPs had gone pale. Others stared at the screen in horrified fascination. The Chancellor, sitting in the front row, reached unconsciously for his chest, as if he could feel crosshairs settling there. When the man on the roof realized the cameras had found him, his reaction was swift and professional. No panic, no desperate scrambling. He began breaking down his weapon with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Armed response, converge on Treasury roof immediately, the lead security officer barked into his radio. Subject is mobile and armed. Repeat, subject is mobile and armed. On screen, they watched as tactical teams rappelled from helicopters, black-clad figures moving with deadly precision across the rooftop. The sniper had almost finished packing his weapon when they reached him. The takedown was swift and professional. Within 30 seconds, the man was face down on the roof tiles, hands zip-tied behind his back, his rifle secured as evidence. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices carried relief instead of confusion. Some MPs were actually applauding, though they seemed unsure whether they were clapping for the tactical teams or the little girl who had spotted the threat. But in the eye of the storm, the little girl just pressed her face against Deren's chest and said quietly, "I told you so." The armed response was swift and professional. Within minutes, the man on the roof was in custody, his rifle and equipment secured as evidence. The immediate threat was over, but the questions were just beginning. In a secure briefing room deep within Parliament, the girl sat wrapped in a thermal blanket, sipping hot chocolate, while a paramedic cleaned the cut on her face with gentle efficiency. The room itself was sterile and windowless, designed for sensitive conversations, soundproofed walls, secure communications equipment, and the kind of serious atmosphere that made even adults speak in whispers. She'd given her name as Penny Morrison, 8 years old, from Bermondsey. Her mother worked as a cleaner in one of the government buildings nearby, starting her shift at 5 in the morning to avoid the crowds and finish before the important people arrived for work. Penny had been staying with a neighbour, Mrs. Chen, every morning since the school holidays began. The Prime Minister sat across from her, his usual parliamentary confidence replaced by something much more human. A man who'd just realised how close he'd come to dying and was struggling to process it. A child psychologist sat nearby, Dr. Sarah Williams, who specialised in interviewing young witnesses to serious crimes. Next to her was Detective Chief Inspector Malcolm Hayes from the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Unit, a man whose calm demeanour masked 20 years of hunting down people who wanted to kill other people. "Can you tell us exactly what you saw this morning, Penny?" DCI Hayes asked gently, his notebook open but pen unmoving. "Take your time, there's no rush." Penny wrapped her small hands around the warm mug and took a careful sip. The hot chocolate had marshmallows floating in it. Someone's attempt to make this feel less like an interrogation and more like a friendly chat. It wasn't really working. "Mum drops me at Mrs. Chen's house before school starts. She lives on Marsham Street, near the big glass building. But this morning I forgot my reading book. We're doing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So I went back to get it from Mum's cleaning trolley." She spoke in that matter-of-fact way children do, as if witnessing an assassination plot was just another part of her Tuesday morning routine. She keeps her stuff in the alley behind the Justice Building. It's where the cleaners are allowed to park their trolleys during the day. That's where I saw him. "Tell us about this man. What did he look like?" Penny closed her eyes for a moment, concentrating. "Tall, taller than you," she said, looking at DCI Hayes. "Dark hair, but going grey at the sides. Had glasses, little ones, like half glasses that old people wear for reading, and he was wearing white clothes." "What kind of white clothes?" "Like what doctors wear, but thicker, made of different material, and they had lots of pockets. He kept taking things out of different pockets and clipping them together." The detective and psychologist exchanged glances. A tactical vest designed to look like medical scrubs, sophisticated camouflage for an urban environment. "Tell us about what he was doing with these things he was clipping together." "Long black things that click together like Lego. Made this really satisfying click sound when the pieces fit properly. He was very careful with them, like they were expensive and might break if he wasn't gentle." The detective and psychologist exchanged glances. A modular rifle system, definitely professional grade. He was lying down, on his tummy, looking through a little telescope thing attached to the long black thing, and he had wires coming out of his ears, going down to a little box clipped to his belt. Communication equipment. This was sounding more and more like a coordinated operation. "What happened when he saw you?" Penny's voice got smaller. "He looked at me for a long time, like he was thinking. Then he said something into the wire thing. I couldn't hear what, but his mouth was moving." She touched the bandage on her face unconsciously. "I tried to run, but I tripped on some metal pipes stacked against the wall. That's how I got hurt. When I got up, he was putting his things away really fast." "Why didn't you go to the police?" the Prime Minister asked gently. Penny's face scrunched up in frustration. "I did. I told the policeman at the gate, but he said I was making up stories and told me to go find my mum and stop bothering people." The PM's jaw tightened visibly. Heads were going to roll for that particular failure. "So you came here instead?" "I saw him," she said, nodding toward Deren, who stood silently by the door like a red-coated sentinel. All the other grown-ups were moving around and talking and not really looking at anything. But he was just watching, like he was really paying attention. "How did you know he would help?" Penny considered this seriously, like it was a question that deserved a proper answer. "My granddad was a soldier. He used to stand really still like that when he was thinking hard about something important. Mum says soldiers are trained to notice things other people miss." She looked up at Deren with something approaching hero worship. "And he looked like someone who would believe me." Out of the mouths of babes. A trained soldier's situational awareness, misinterpreted by a child as simply being a good listener. It had saved the Prime Minister's life. The debriefing that followed revealed the full scope of what had been prevented. The sniper was Marcus Webb, 42, a former army marksman who'd been dishonourably discharged for insubordination and mental health issues. His service record showed expert marksmanship qualifications and training in long-range surveillance. Since leaving the military, he'd fallen in with an extreme political group that had been on MI5's watch list for months, the kind of people who talked about purifying British politics through violence. His rifle was military grade, a modular L115A3 sniper system that could be broken down into innocuous-looking components and reassembled in under 2 minutes. The scope was thermal imaging capable, worth more than most people's cars. His position had been carefully chosen for maximum impact, elevated, concealed, with multiple escape routes planned. If Penny hadn't spotted him, if she hadn't found the courage to approach a royal guard, if Deren hadn't trusted the instincts of an 8-year-old girl, Webb would have had a clear shot at not just the Prime Minister, but potentially half the cabinet. The investigation also revealed how Webb had gained access to the Treasury building. He'd used fake credentials, identifying him as a heating engineer conducting routine maintenance checks. The building's security had been compromised for over a week. He'd been making practice runs, timing the guards' rotations, mapping sightlines. This wasn't a crime of passion or a desperate last act. This was a professional assassination attempt that had been months in the planning. The implications sent shockwaves through the security establishment. How had someone with Webb's background managed to acquire military-grade weapons? How had he identified the Prime Minister's schedule with such precision? How many other people were involved in the plot? But for all the investigations and inquiries that would follow, the simple truth remained. A little girl had seen something that didn't look right, and she'd found the one person who took her seriously. Everything else was just paperwork. Later that evening, as Parliament emptied and the media circus moved on to other stories, Deren found himself back at his original post in the courtyard. The crowds had thinned, the tourists had gone home, and the weight of the day was settling on his shoulders like lead. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You're still here." He turned to see Penny approaching with a woman who had to be her mother. Same dark hair, same serious eyes. The cut on Penny's face was properly bandaged now, and she was wearing a clean jumper that someone had found for her. "Thought you might have gone home," she said. "Soon," Deren replied. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Mum says I can have pizza for dinner because I was brave today." Her mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't listened to her." Deren shook his head. "She did the hard part. All I did was carry her." Penny looked up at him seriously. "Will you get in trouble for moving when you weren't supposed to?" "Probably not," he said. "And even if I do, it was worth it." She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her all day. Good, because someone had to listen. As they walked away, Penny turned back once and waved. Deren raised his hand slightly in response. Barely a movement, but enough. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in whispers. Sometimes the biggest threats come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the difference between tragedy and safety comes down to one person deciding to trust a scared little girl who just wanted someone to listen. The next morning, the newspapers were full of headlines about the foiled assassination attempt. The Times led with "Child Hero Saves PM," while the Daily Mail went with "8-year-old Stops Sniper." Most focused on the dramatic scene in Parliament, the political implications, the security failures that had allowed a gunman to get so close to the heart of British democracy. Politicians gave grave statements about reviewing security protocols. Experts debated the state of domestic terrorism on morning television shows. But buried in the inside pages was a smaller story that most people missed. A photo of Lance Corporal Thomas Deren back at his post, standing perfectly still in his red tunic and bearskin hat. The caption read simply, "The Guard Who Moved." The article was only 3 paragraphs long, no mention of medals or commendations. The military didn't publicise internal disciplinary reviews, even when they resulted in quiet recommendations for bravery awards. No quotes about heroism or duty. Deren had declined all interview requests, referring journalists to the MOD press office. Just a soldier doing his job, which, it turned out, sometimes meant knowing when to break the rules. The photograph had been taken just after dawn, before the tourist crowds arrived, when Parliament Square was quiet, except for the occasional delivery van and early morning commuters hurrying to catch the tube. Deren stood exactly where he'd been standing when Penny first approached him, his posture identical, his expression unchanged. To anyone who didn't know what had happened, he was just another ceremonial guard doing what ceremonial guards do. But if you looked closely, and the photographer had been skilled enough to capture this, there was something different in his eyes, an alertness, a readiness that went beyond normal duty. The eyes of someone who'd learned that the most important moments often come without warning, announced by nothing more than a small hand tugging at a trouser leg. And in a primary school in Bermondsey, a little girl named Penny Morrison told her classmates about the day she met a real-life soldier who taught her that sometimes the best way to be heard is to find someone who knows how to be still. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had initially thought it was another one of Penny's elaborate stories. The child had quite an imagination. But when the news broke that evening, Mrs. Patterson found herself looking at Penny with new eyes. The drawing that Penny had made for Deren was pinned to the classroom wall now, next to the other children's artwork. It showed a tall figure in red with a big black hat, standing next to a much smaller figure with dark hair. At the top, in carefully printed letters, it said, "My hero," and at the bottom, "Thank you for listening, Penny." The other children gathered around it during break time, asking Penny to tell the story again and again. Each time she emphasized the same point. He was the only one who really listened. All the grown-ups were too busy, or too important, or too sure they knew better. But he just listened. Have you ever had a moment where you had to choose between following the rules and doing what you knew was right? Do you think Royal Guards should be allowed to break protocol in emergency situations like this? And would you have had the courage to approach a stranger for help if you were in Penny's situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story showed you a different side of what our Royal Guards really do, hit that like button and show your respect for these dedicated soldiers. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss our daily Royal Guard stories. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Check out our other Royal Guard stories appearing on your screen right now. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.